What's going on, everybody? This is the Reformation Keegan, and I'm here with another video. Today, we have Daredevil, the Man Without Fear, written by the legendary Frank Miller. So, Frank Miller's writing has always been very divisive. You either love his writing or you absolutely despise it. I, for the most part, love his writing, but I'm going to drop a very unpopular opinion here. I believe that this may be his best work over The Dark Knight Returns, which The Dark Knight Returns is fantastic, but I think Daredevil, the Man Without Fear, actually ages better, in my opinion, just based off content. So I just want to put that out there now. And now if you unsubscribe, agree to disagree, but I respect your opinion. Anyhow, one of the things I love about this story is characterization. Every character means something, and every character has their own quirks that make them who they are. And I want to start by talking about a couple things from the first couple of issues. So, one of the things that we learned is that Daredevil has a couple of different meanings, almost a dual meaning for Matt Murdock. I'm going to get to the second meaning later, but I want to talk a little bit about the first one. We learned that the name Daredevil comes from an initial point of sarcasm. And the kids around Daredevil tease him for being introverted and timid by calling him Daredevil, which is the exact antonym of introverted and timid, at least in a colloquial sense it is. Jack Murdock, too, is another one that I think has a very strong sense of characterization here. So, due to his association with the Fixer, he explicitly tells Matt to never be anything like him. And I think this is actually very relatable and a really good sense of realism that Miller puts at play here. Because how oftentimes do you see children that are curious? Children are always asking questions or making comments about things that they observe. And this cognitivity leads to parents sometimes having to be more honest than they need to be. And they tell their child, don't be anything like me. Which is a difficult position to put in a child, but also it's a very, very realistic thing that happens. At least it's happened, to me. But it's also happened to a lot of other children too. They just kind of suppress those emotions. And maybe this is what happens with Matt Murdock, in my opinion. I think Matt suppresses a lot of these emotions and then has to use Daredevil as this extra vessel to let out all of that inner hostility. Anyhow, there's a lot of really good things about this, and the characterization of Jack Murdock is super strong. And there's one quote that really stands out to me, and it says the following: "But it keeps food on the table, it keeps Matt fed, and it buys Matt shoes. And all it costs Jack Murdock is his soul." So really, really good diction here by Miller. And I think one of the things that this shows is a socioeconomic and political realism, something that Miller talks a lot about in his own stories. So I think that this hits home because now we have a rationale of why Jack Murdock is boxing and the reasons behind all of the fights. And we know that Jack has his back against a wall, and he's doing this to make sure that Matt doesn't go hungry and to make sure that Matt has shoes so that Matt doesn't go to school or go in public and not have what he needs. So that's a very noble and relatable thing, even though you have to commit a crime for something that shouldn't have to even be a factor in your life. So that's a double-edged sword here. So the sense of duality in this case. Another relationship that I found super interesting was Matt's relationship with Stick. So after the blindness occurs, Matt is really down in the dumps and he has breakdown crying, and Stick, I don't want to say comes to the rescue, but Stick comes to help. And this relationship kind of reminds me of Daniel LaRusso and Mr. Miyagi's in The Karate Kid, where Daniel's got to move to California. He's got to live with that. He's got to adjust, and he's not adjusting too well at school. He's getting bullied, or if you believe other theories, LaRusso's actually the bully. But in this case, I'm using it as an example that he's the victim, and Mr. Miyagi helps him through karate overcome all of his obstacles. Stick, in a similar way, is doing this as well, but I think he takes more of the Johnny Lawrence approach with Miguel, where he's a little more hard-nosed, and we can see that when Matt's crying, having kind of a bit of a tantrum or a breakdown, and Stick says, "Stop feeling sorry for yourself." And that's a really aggressive tone that Miller uses, but it does the trick because a lot of times we have to stop feeling sorry for ourselves. We have to pick ourselves up and keep on moving forward. And that's what Stick teaches Matt to do. He teaches Matt how to use his own grief to his advantage and use his own, I don't want to say disability, but uses his own tragedy to his advantage, because what happened is a tragedy. And what happens is Daredevil, or aka Matt Murdock, learns how to use his different senses, which get heightened from the accident. And Stick is somebody who I wish was used a little bit more, because I think he's a tremendous character, but there can be an argument made that having less of the character actually makes him mean a bit more, and then he leaves you wanting more, because a lot of times in stories you want to be left wanting more, which is a good thing, because if there's too much of a sense of completion, it can make the story feel a bit flat. But what we find out throughout Stick's relationship with Matt is this story is also a theme of self-discovery. It's a self-discovery for Matt. And then we find out later too that Matt is also filled with vengeance. But we understand why. Because Jack Murdock basically commits his own death. And he's supposed to fix a fight via the fixer. And he knows he's going to die if he doesn't fix the fight, but he wants Matt to see him win. So he wins. And then he's killed after the fight. And Matt goes in this anger-induced rage. He goes after the group that killed his dad. And he targets them 1 by 1 or 2 by 2, depending on how many are there at the time. And Matt spied on his father and knew about his dirty dealings. So that's a lot too for a kid to take in, which again exhibits a sense of realism where kids usually find out what their parents are up to and their parents try to hide it from them, whether it's for a good reason or not. But he goes after Mikhail, he goes after Gillian, he goes after Slade in the gym, which I think is the best fight segment maybe in this whole comic. Little Marcello, the Fixer, and Angelo. But Angelo ends up perishing, and then Matt, in his fit of rage against Angelo at the club he's at, a woman sees all of this going on, and she panics, and then she falls out of the window and dies. So Matt's beside himself and retreats, even though it was an accident. And due to his emotional tendencies, Stick eventually views Matt as useless throughout events like these, which this is more of a theme of tough love as opposed to it being an insult. Because Stick's not only disappointed, but Stick is also angry because Matt is using his emotions against himself. You have to keep your emotions in check while still maintaining a level of aggressiveness when you have to deal with situations like these. But you have to not be an emotional fighter. If you're an emotional fighter, then you're going to be prone to walk into mistakes and make mistakes. And I was just wondering, why does Frank Miller move on so quickly from Matt's grief when the woman dies? Because we already know he's dealing with the grief of Jack Murdock. But I kind of want to know why the grief moves on a little bit faster in this process. However, I think the story gets even better because when we fast forward another year, Matt is now beating up more bullies, and he's beating up Foggy's bullies in college. So we find out that bullying hits home for Matt because it's something that he undergoes as well. And this is one of the very few times where Matt fights emotionally and it works. And it makes sense within the context of the situation given. So I really like this because Foggy is, the stereotypical kid who is very intelligent, doesn't really look the way that society wants him to look, but Daredevil is that symbol of hope for people like Foggy. So I really, really like that part. I thought that was a pretty emotional part. But I think Daredevil, aka Matt Murdock, I think he deals with grief all the time. And my question about Frank Miller moving on from grief with the woman who fell out of the window, it's because I know Matt feels personally responsible, as he does, as it's shown through the comic. And there's a phrase in comics of show don't tell where I believe, in comics and writing, show don't tell, where I believe Frank is trying to show us that grief without telling us that Matt is experiencing that grief, if that makes sense. So visually, from a multimodal point of view, you're seeing this grief still unfold. It's just Matt doesn't explicitly say that he's going through this grief. You just, if you know the story, you know. Anyhow, Matt ends up becoming emotionally reliant on Elektra too. And I don't know if that's the individual that you want to be emotionally reliant on. And he begins to fall in love with her in a lot of ways. And we learn that Elektra does not comply with confinement. And she has to fill her own void by sneaking out at night. Very similar to Spider-Man, very similar to Daredevil, except Elektra is a little more extreme than those two. At least I would say so. But she ends up going after 5 men, laying them out, possibly killing them. And in Matt's dream, Stick returns to warn him about Elektra and calling her poison. But what I find really intriguing about this is this a dream or is this reality? Or can it be both? Because I don't think there's one answer. I think that this is actually a realistic dream that probably did happen in some way, shape, or form that we cannot fathom. But because of Daredevil's senses, he was able to know that this was real. And it shows, too, that Stick, like a Johnny Lawrence type of figure, is harsh in his ways of delivering his messages, but he still has a deep care for Matt, which is why he warns him. Otherwise, he wouldn't warn him. And it's not that Elektra is a bad person, but when you're dealing with an individual with a very inconsistent emotional range, and you're already dealing with grief in an inconsistent emotional range, it's a recipe for disaster. That's how, unfortunately, a lot of romantic and interpersonal relationships end when two people are emotionally dependent on other things that are rather unhealthy. So again, it's another sense of realism from Miller here. But one of the other interesting things is Kingpin in this. So we find out that Mickey is being recruited for slavery by Larks and Kingpin. And Daredevil's obviously got to come to her rescue. But this version of Kingpin is super violent, and there's no crime that he wouldn't commit if it means making money and keeping an empire. And one of the interesting parts of this is that Matt begs Larks to not make him kill him. And this is where we see a bit of duality, where Matt still is dealing with vengeance and he's filling his own void by being Daredevil, but he's also a lawyer and he's got to deal with things more diplomatically, and killing somebody is not the way to go about it. And Matt also has that no-kill rule. So you're getting the lawyer Matt Murdock, and you're getting the child Matt Murdock, and you're getting Daredevil all within one together, especially in this scene. And what's interesting is it kind of works out in a grotesque way for Matt, because Lark shoots at Matt, and because of what Styx taught him, Matt knows how to deflect the bullet, but it comes back and it hits Larks right in the middle of the head, and he's dead. So the problem's solved, but probably not the way that Matt wanted it to be solved. But he ends up helping Mickey and rescuing her. And it speaks volumes when Kingpin admits that he has trepidation and a little bit of fear of Daredevil. Because we can see in the Daredevil show and in Born Again, Kingpin still has a little bit of fear of Daredevil, because he knows what Matt's capable of. But also, that fear is what makes Kingpin go to the extreme. And it's not a fear in the sense of intimidation. It's just Kingpin knows he's got to be cautious with Daredevil, because he knows that Daredevil can match him if need be. Also, watch the Daredevil TV show, the original. It's really good. And then watch Born Again after, because that's also really good. So what we see here is that Matt becomes Kingpin's kryptonite. So Kingpin fears what he can't see, which is all of Matt's ways of getting to him and thwarting his plans. However, Matt's ways of getting to Kingpin kind of don't show Matt's sight, but it shows Matt's vision, because there is a difference. So Matt doesn't have a sight, but he has a vision on how he can thwart Kingpin's plans. And Kingpin doesn't always know when Daredevil's going to be around. And that's another thing too, is Daredevil's unpredictable, but in a good way. But Kingpin is also unpredictable because he's not mentally stable. But anyway, one thing I wanted to add too is the name Daredevil. And I know I mentioned it a bit earlier, but there's a couple ways that we can interpret this. So Obviously, the kids tease Matt and they call him Daredevil. That's a colloquial aspect of the name. But also, Jack Murdock was nicknamed Devil, and he also had the mask, as it's seen in like one of the posters in the panels. So what we get here is the name evolving. The name evolves from a colloquialism to a proverbial rite of passage, and Matt uses this name as a tribute. And we can see in this story how Matt absolutely despises, he hates the term daredevil, but he ends up embracing it. And he ends up embracing it because one, it's a tribute to his father, and two, because it was something that people made fun of him over and something that he overcame. And Matt's story of self discovery is all about overcoming things. So that's my analysis of Daredevil, the man without fear. I thought the relationship with Elektra was super intriguing. I thought his relationship with even Kingpin is really intriguing because, like I said, Kingpin does have a sense of trepidation over Daredevil because it's not something that Kingpin can fully control, and it's a threat to his empire. And I love the relationship with Stick, which is incredible. And I also think that Daredevil's story is one that I think most kids can relate to because a lot of kids still get bullied to this day. And if they can overcome that bullying, they become an even bigger person going forward. So it's my analysis. I hope to keep doing more of these. Keep the engagement up. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. I'm going to try and get a few more of these done by the end of the year. And I'm going to keep reading. You keep watching. You keep commenting. You keep subscribing. And we will keep on reforming. So Daredevil, Man Without Fear. This was amazing to read. And I cannot wait to read more Daredevil. Until then, we'll see you soon.